Hey everyone, before you purchase this asset, I just wanted to let you know that we're going to be going over how to do everything in this tutorial video in just a few moments. So if you don't want to purchase it and you want to learn how to do this yourself and program it all from scratch, then I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. The reason I created this asset is number one, if you want to purchase the artwork and use that, it's not very complex. But if you just want to support the channel and you want to support what it is that I'm doing, please consider purchasing the asset. It is only $3 and it really helps me out a lot and really supports the channel and lets me know that you guys enjoy what it is that we're doing here. I just want to point that out beforehand. That way, if you're looking at this and saying, what the heck, I need to pay $3 to get this, don't worry about it. We're going to do it all right here in this video. Hello Joe and welcome to another GameMaker tutorial. My name is Alex. We're going to be doing a asset walkthrough / tutorial video today. It's been a while since I've posted one of these, but I just created this little chunk of code in the game I was working on, and I figured, hey, let's make a video out of it. Let's turn it into a distributable piece of software that you guys can download and put in your project if you want to. So as you can see right here in this video, we have this little dummy right here, and that's the whole asset. It's just this physics-based dummy that you can put into your game. You can use it in a fighting game. In this example, I'm using it in a shooting platformer. You could use it in a top-down RPG where you beat the crap out of it. You've seen Undertale, they have that dummy that the main character beats up throughout the game. So you can kind of use this in whatever project you want to. It is physics-based, but I'll show you how we can interact with it where it is the only physics-based object in a game. So you could have a totally non-physics-based game, but you could just make this the one physics object in the game. And we're going to showcase how to create it and how to implement it in this video. So let me just go ahead and showcase real quick what it looks like, and I'm just going to shoot it a couple times, and you'll see that it has a nice little flash on hits, and we also just get some recoil. Now I do have it turn dark gray once it's been hit 3 times. That's just for my own project. You can do whatever you want with that. I'm going to showcase how we can do all of those things here in this video, but you'll see that it kind of reacts and it just kind of springs back and forth, and it has just a nice wobble feel to it. It kind of really feels like it's involved, interactive, and part of the world. So without anything else, let's jump into the code, and I'm going to show you how to create all of this from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to build this inside of my pre-existing project just to show you what the outcome is going to look like, but the code for it is going to be the same no matter if you're using a brand new project or one of your existing projects. So let's go ahead and create an object, and I'm going to just call this obj, let's just call this bag base, and we're going to create 3 objects. So the way this works is it's a physics-based object that consists of 3 parts: the base, the stand, and the wobbly top part. And it's just a combination of a couple different joints and some properties that we set up, and then the physics engine inside GameMaker handles all of this for us. So let's go ahead and create these 3 objects right here. So we have the bag base, we have obj bag. Let's just call this the stem. This is kind of like the stick part. And then I'm going to create another object called obj bag body. Okay, so we have 3 objects here. Let's go ahead and first we're going to tick on uses physics for all 3 of them. So we're going to go through uses physics, uses physics. Perfect. I'm going to go through and give it some sprites now. Okay, so I've just dragged in my sprites that we're going to be using and just set those up. So now we have sprites and we have 3 physics-based objects. I'm going to come into my physics tab on each of them, and I'm just going to make sure that my collision shape is the shape that I want it to be. So these sprites are pretty small and our collision shape is defaulting pretty large. So I'm just going to come through real quick and drag and drop these collision shapes to match the shape of the object that we're working with. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and make it a circle just because it is kind of an odd shape. So the square doesn't really get what I want. I think the circle is just kind of better for catching a lot of the collisions here. So I'm just going to make this a circle, and that should do it for what we need in this project. Oh, and the first thing I do want to point out is before we get into code is we're going to come back to physics in our base object, and I'm going to set the density of this down to 0. So this just means that the base of our punching bag is not going to move anywhere. It's locked in place. And the stem and the body and all that stuff's going to wiggle, but the base is anchored down to the ground. Now you could always change this if you want the body bag to, kind of go flying once it's taken enough damage or enough momentum to its physics body. But for now, I just want this base to be fixed to the ground, so it's not going to go anywhere, and we can just do all of the movement in the top part. So, all right, let's add a create event now finally, and I'm going to create a couple variables. The first one is going to be called body object, and we're going to say obj bag body. And then we're going to say stem object equals obj bag stem. Stem is going to be our new variable. This is going to be a reference to an instance of the stem object. So I'm going to say stem is equal to instance create layer, and I'm going to say just x, y. And what we want this to do is we want this to create at the top of our base object. So you'll see that when we open up the sprite object that we have our origin in the bottom center. And so we want the stem to draw at this point right here. So I'm going to leave the origin here, but we're just going to make sure that we adjust for this offset when we create our object. So I'm just going to say stem equals instance create layer at our x and our y, but we don't want to start it at our y origin. We're going to say y minus sprite get height of our sprite index. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do is we need to specify the layer that we're going to spawn it on, and mine is just called interactables. You can just spawn this on instances, whatever layer you're working on. This doesn't matter at all. And we're going to just say stem object. Cool, so that was pretty straightforward. We're going to do the same thing for our body. So let's come through here. We're going to say body equals instance create layer, and we're going to say x and y minus, but we don't want to get the sprite get height of our sprite index. We actually want to spawn the body at the top of the stem. So if we open up the stem, if we open up the stem sprite right here, you can see again that our origin is at the bottom center. So we want to make sure that we spawn the body right here. So for that, I'm going to just say x, y minus sprite get height of our stem dot sprite index. So that will just spawn it at the top of our stem object. So if we were to run this project, we would see that this should work just fine. So let's go ahead and open up our room, and we'll go ahead and drop one of these in here just so we can test out that everything is going to be working. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to grab my bag base, and I'm just going to drop this right here in the room. So if I run the project, we should see everything spawn correctly. Okay, so everything spawned correctly, but it all just kind of fell through the object. So we need to make a couple different changes. Number one, we need to make sure that we specify that this is the body object that we're spawning. And they are physics-based objects without any collisions or anything defined. They just have their rigid bodies established to them. So we need to set up some sort of connection, some sort of joint between these objects that we can use to establish their connection. So in order to do a joint setup, GameMaker has a couple built-in joints that we can work with, but we're going to work with one in particular in this video that is really going to achieve the effect that we want. And we're going to say physics joint weld create. And if we go to the documentation on what a weld joint is, it kind of explains that it is a strong but flexible straight line joint connecting two instances along a given angle. And that's basically what we want. We want it to be sturdy but flexible so that it's a little, wobbly, but it still maintains its straight line angle most of the time. So let's go ahead and establish the instances that this joint is going to be connecting. So if we look here, we need instance 1 and 2. So we're going to say the first one is we're going to first attach ourself, the base, to the stem. So we're going to say ID because this is the base object. And we're going to attach the base to the stem. And where does the point that we want to establish this anchor? Well, we're going to just say stem.x, stem.y. So this will establish it at the bottom of the stem because, again, remember our origin is at the bottom center. Now our reference angle is going to be 0. So it's going to start at the angle of 0, and then we want to maintain that reference angle. So we're going to go ahead and say 0 is where we want it to start and to kind of maintain. We don't want it to give it any sort of frequency. So this means if we want it to kind of wobble consistently, we could assign it some sort of frequency. So that way, when you play the game, it's constantly wobbling back and forth, kind of like a motor, but a little different. But we're going to say for this example, we want that to be 0. And we're going to set the damping ratio to 0. And we don't want the two joints objects to collide with each other. We want them to kind of be one object. So we're going to say false. Okay, so we've set up a joint between the stem and the body, or the stem and the base. Let's go ahead and create a joint between the stem and the body now. So I'm going to say create a joint here, but that's going to be between the stem and the body. And we want this to be body.x and body.y. Okay, great. So you can see that there's actually our object is being created correctly. There's a little bit of depth sorting that we need to fix, and we don't have any sort of interactions with any objects at this point. So let's go ahead and make a couple of these changes. Let's go ahead and just say body.depth is equal to stem.depth -1. So this is just going to pull the body in front of the stem, and we can do the same for the stem. We're going to say stem.depth equals depth, our depth, the base, +1. So this is going to put the stem behind the base, and then this is going to put the body in front of the stem. So theoretically, the base and the body will be on the same depth layer. Let's say we wanted to flip it to face the other direction. Well, even if we were to come into our room editor and open up this and flip the X so that it's now facing the left side towards the player, our body wouldn't face left either. So we need to come in here and we need to say body.imageXscale is equal to image X scale. So this means that if we choose to start the base facing a different direction, then the body will also choose to mirror that direction. All right, so let's go ahead and press play one more time, and we should have the base and the body looking left towards the player, and our depths should be set up correctly. So as you can see, the body here is kind of not centered on the stem. So when we go ahead and create the body, we need to actually change this. Instead of spawning at the X position of the base, we actually want to spawn it at the X position of the stem. So we're going to say stem.x. Okay, so at this point, we could probably keep tweaking the X and Y positions of the stem and the body to get it to look the way that we want to. But for now, we've done everything that we need to in terms of setting it up. Let's just start actually interacting with it, because you can see at this point that nothing is happening when we shoot it or when we walk up to it. And this is because the game objects here, the player, the gun, the bullet, none of those are physics-based objects, so they aren't interacting with a physics-based dummy. So in order to do this, how can we get that result that we saw in the first example? Well, all we have to do is just apply some sort of impulse to the dummy real quick, and that should get the dummy to react the way that we want it to. So let's go ahead and come over to our OBJ bullet. Okay, and if we open up the step event, we have an empty slate to work with. So how do we get this to bullet to interact with the dummy, even though the bullet is not a physics object and the dummy is? Well, it's very simple. All we have to do is just set up some sort of collision check, and then if we hit, we are going to apply some sort of impulse to it. So if I go ahead and set up a collision rectangle, so let's say var collision equals collision rectangle. Okay, so where do we want this? We're going to say x minus sprite x offset, and that's going to get the top left corner. We're going to say y minus sprite y offset. That's going to be the top corner. And then we're going to say x minus sprite x offset plus sprite width, and y minus sprite y offset plus sprite height. So that's basically just going to create a collision rectangle over the whole bullet, no matter where the origin is or no matter what the width and height is. So this is a pretty dynamic way to approach this solution. We're going to check for a collision with our OBJ bag body. So we don't want to collide with anything other than the body. And we're going to say it's false, and sure, we don't want to check for our collision with ourselves, so not a big deal. Okay, so once we have decided that we have collided with our OBJ bag body, the first thing we need to do is check for the distance and the angle from the bullet to the body. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of variables. We're going to say var direction equals point direction from x, y to collision.x collision.y, because remember, this collision is going to be holding whatever the return value is from this collision rectangle, which will be an instance of our bag body. And we want to say var length is going to be equal to 10. So this is essentially the knockback that we want to apply. So we can even call this, let's call this knockback, since that'll be a little bit more intuitive of a variable name. So this is the force that we want to kind of apply to that body. So we're going to say with collision. So now we're going to move our context into the collision object, and we're going to say physics apply impulse. And so what's the position that we want to apply that impulse at? Well, we're going to say x, y of the bullet, and we're going to say the x impulse is going to be length dir x. So this is going to get the x component of our angle direction knockback triangle that we've created. So our length is going to be our knockback, and our direction is going to be direction. We're just going to take the same thing and paste it over, and we're just going to change this to get the Y component. All right, so we're kind of getting some crazy behavior here, but you can see that the bag is starting to respond to the body. So this is kind of what we want, but let's go ahead and add some more constraints to this to make it so that it's not so crazy. So the first thing that we can do is we can destroy our bullets on impact. So what's happening is the bullet is hitting the bag, and then it's going to calculate our impulse, and then the bullet keeps traveling through the bag and it calculates the impulse. And so the bullet goes through the bag, maybe 30 times in 1 second. And so we're applying 30 impulses instantaneously. So the easiest solution to this would just be to destroy the bullet so that it can only calculate this once. And you can see already it's starting to look a little bit better. If you don't want to destroy the instance that's applying the impulse, you could just set up a simple Boolean check to make sure that this impulse only gets applied once. And then once the bullet leaves the body, you turn it back to true or whatever it is. And then, you can apply the impulse on the next one. But for now, this is a nice simple way to get this effect. So we're pretty much almost there. You'll notice that the biggest thing is that our stem looks super weird and awkward, and it just doesn't look really great. So how do we get that to look a little bit better like we did in the demo? So I'm going to come over to the OBJ bag stem, and we're going to add a create event, and we're going to say angle equals image angle, and that's pretty straightforward. And now we're going to add a draw event. We're going to say draw sprite ext, and we want our sprite index, our image index, our x, our y, our image x scale, our image y scale. And so all of these properties are going to be the same. We just want to draw our sprite exactly the same as normal, but instead of using image angle as our reference, we're going to use this new variable called angle that we've created, and this is going to be what is going to determine how it's drawn. And we're going to just leave everything else as defaulted. So now all we have to do is just update this angle in order to draw this at a new angle. So if I come over to my OBJ bag body, and all we're going to do is we're going to say step events, and we're going to, first we need to add a create event, and we're going to say our stem is equal to undefined. So our body needs a reference to the stem object, which it doesn't have. So when we create the object here in our OBJ bag base, we're going to say body.stem is equal to stem. So now our body has a reference to the stem object that it is attached to. And all we can do is we can come into our step event, and we're going to say if stem is not equal to undefined and instance exists of our stem. So that means our stem has been established and does exist. We're going to say stem.angle, which is the new variable we just created, is equal to our image angle of the body. So as the body hits and gets knocked around, its image angle is updating. And so what we want to do is we want to take that image angle of whatever that body is and send it to the stem and say, now draw your image angle at the same image angle as the body. And this will work because our image, our sprite for our stem is pinned at the bottom. This should create a very realistic looking effect that will look all right. So if I go ahead and shoot it, okay, so it's not too bad. It's a little dramatic though. So I'm just gonna go ahead and make one very simple change. I'm gonna come into here and I'm gonna say stem angle is equal to image angle times 0.75. So we're gonna only take a 3/4 of the image angle of the body and send that to the stem. So let's go ahead and click this. And already that's starting to look a little bit better. So now the last thing we're going to do to fix this is we're going to just bring the stem down into the base a little bit more so that it's a little more hidden. So when we create the stem, we're going to say instance create layer x, y, and we put this at the top of our sprite, but let's go ahead and multiply this by 0.5, which will move it to about halfway. And then we can do the same for the body. Let's say we only want to put the body on 3/4 of the way up the stem as well. But now you'll see that we're actually getting a pretty realistic rotation here. How can we do a couple more things with it? You'll notice in the first part of the video, I showed that the character flashed white and it turned gray after a couple times. So how do we do anything like that? Well, let's come back to our body object, and we're going to create a variable, and we're just going to call it hit. And this is just going to say if it's registered as hit, what to do. And we're going to come in and add an alarm 0. And we're going to change the description to hit alarm. And we're going to say hit is equal to false. So then if we come into step and we say if hit is equal to true, or we can just say if hit and alarm 0 is less than 0, we're going to say alarm 0 equals to 10. So if at any point the bag body object hit variable gets sent to true, then the alarm will automatically set itself to 10. And then once the alarm turns itself off, the hit variable will be set to false. So all we have to do now is just toggle this hit variable whenever we want to do any sort of hit animation or hit features or hit, special effects. So to demonstrate this, we will use that shader that I'm including in the asset. And so we're going to say, normally what we want to do is we want to draw ourselves, right? So we're going to say if not hit. So if hit is false, let's draw ourselves normally. But if hit is true, then what we want to do is we want to set our shader. So we're going to say shader set, and we're going to do shader white. So this is just going to draw the object all white. And then we're going to say draw self, and we want to do shader reset. So let's actually go back to our OBJ bullets. And we're going to say here, when we hit our collision object, which is just our bag, we want to say collision dot hit equals true. Now, what happens if we collide with an object that doesn't have this hit variable? Well, this will crash our game here. So normally, if we set it up properly, this should never happen, right? We should always make sure that anything we're checking with has this hit variable. But if you want it to be extra safe, you can include this line here. We're going to say if variable instance exists, and we're going to check the collision instance, and we want to check for the variable hit. And so now we're going to say, hey, if the collision object has the variable called hit, then we'll set it to true. So this line of code will never crash our project, even if the bullet hits an object that doesn't have the variable hit and tries to set it. This should never crash our project. And you'll see that everything is working just fine. The bullet is hitting the body, it's setting hit equal to true, and then the body sets the alarm and sets the shader because hit is true, and then it draws white, but then after 10 frames, it turns itself off, everything resets, and we're getting everything looking good. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please let me know, leave a comment down below, like the video, subscribe. Like I said, I wanted to show you how you could do all of this in this tutorial so that you don't have to purchase the asset if you don't want to. But if you want to support the channel and you want to support what it is that I'm doing, then I just ask that you consider purchasing the asset. It's only $3, or checking out some of the other assets I have on my itch page. Like I said, you'll also be getting the artwork for this that I'm using and one other sprite for the body bag, which is just more of a traditional punching bag sprite. But these are very small, little low fidelity sprites, so you can always just steal them from this video. But anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching this video. Hopefully this was something that you're interested in. If you want to see more of these little mini micro objects, let me know, and I will start doing more of these and trying to release more of them to the public for you all. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.